What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burnett. Back after about a week layaway. I'll explain why in a minute, but in this video, I'm going to be going over a review, a little bit of a breakdown of the Week 8 action, and mainly a look ahead to the Week 9 action. But before I get into everything, if you're going to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. But first of all, addressing why I was away for a week, you might be able to hear it in my voice. It's starting to go away. I was dealing with a little bit of an illness for the last 3 or 4 days or so, kind of when I traditionally film. And I was also moving into a new, bigger apartment. I'm expecting a little girl in the end of December, so getting a little bit more space for her. My wife and I are very excited about her arrival and also to have a little bit more space. But moving on now into the traditional aspect of this show. Very blessed about that, though, by the way. Looking over Week 8, obviously the main game, another top 5 matchup. Georgia goes into Austin and gets a 30-15 win. This top 5 matchup didn't quite deliver like the first two did, but the Bulldogs got a big win. One of the storylines you got to talk about was the bad pass interference call against Texas. That caused a I guess you want to call it a tantrum, whatever. Texas fans throwing water bottles onto the field. Referees end up overturning the call. Does this set a bad precedent? It's hard to know, because would this call have been overturned if the water bottles weren't thrown onto the field? It was a very bad call. I think it warranted a discussion. But if that's what caused the referees, and really only they know what initiated that change, if that's what initiated the change, though, that's a very bad precedent. We saw with the mustard bottles and all that other stuff at Tennessee. Not something you want to see from fans, and I think Texas fans, that was a bad move there. But in the game itself, I mean, there was some frustration, because against what I expected in my prediction for this game, I talked about how Texas has been a strong first half team and wins over Michigan and Oklahoma. Georgia has been kind of a slow start team, big second half team. It went the opposite. Georgia went up 23-0 at halftime. 4 Texas turnovers led to a lot of short fields for the Bulldogs. And even though Carson Beck threw 3 interceptions, and boy, if there's one player that has fallen off a lot this year, it's hard to find many others who have fallen off as much as Carson Beck has. Is he missing Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, some of the other weapons he's had? I don't know. Has he just regressed? I think it's a mix of both. Honestly, I know it's an easy answer, but I really think it is. However, Trevor Etienne picked up the slack. He ran for 3 touchdowns, and Georgia picks up a big win. I think they're rightfully the number 2 team. I think if they could pick up a couple more wins, and maybe if Oregon drops one or looks a little shaky, they might take that top spot. But I think it's the right ranking for Georgia right now. They do still have that loss to an Alabama team that has looked a lot more shaky. And speaking of Alabama, it's a second straight home win for Tennessee over the Crimson Tide, 24-17. It wasn't quite the instant classic that it was last time, not even close, really. 7-0 tied at the half. Jalen Milroe, again, struggled with the turnovers. I'll talk more about that when I'm previewing their game this week against Mizzou. He threw a red zone interception early in the game, I think inside the 5. He had a couple interceptions in the game. For Tennessee, Nico Maleava kind of struggled at times, just under 200 passing yards, a touchdown and an interception, but Dylan Sampson big time picked up the slack, and shout out Sampson. He's on my college football fantasy football team, got me a lot of points this week. He ran for 140 yards and 2 touchdowns, and so the Volunteers, they look like potentially that first team out of that top 5. I think when you look at it, you've got Oregon, you've got Georgia, I would put Ohio State ahead of Penn State in spite of the loss. Either way, those teams are pretty interchangeable at 3 and 4, and then I think Miami is probably the right team at 5. I think Tennessee has proven themselves to be that 6th team. I think, like I said with Georgia, pick up a couple more wins, they boost that resume even more. Speaking of Miami, the Cardiac Canes are back again. They win 52-45 over Louisville. It was more Cam Ward magic. He had 4 touchdowns in the game. But also, another guy who has been added to this team this year from one of the Pac-2 teams, Oregon State transfer Damian Martinez, he ran in a 30-yard touchdown late in this one to put the Hurricanes up by 14, and they were able to hold off the Cardinals and get another exciting win. The Hurricanes are continuing to build. They don't have Clemson on the schedule. The other teams looked really hot in the ACC. So those two teams are probably on a collision course, especially after this important win for the Hurricanes. In the Big Ten, Illinois picked up a 21-7 win over Michigan. I think the Fighting Illini put the Wolverines into the dirt in this game, and by that I mean kind of into a 2024 season grave. I think the Wolverines at this point, they're fighting for pride. I mean, 3 losses, I guess if they find a way to win out, especially with the opponents they have coming up, they would be a contender for the college football playoff, but I simply don't see that happening. And if they drop 1, I think they're out of the college football playoff race entirely. I really think this loss really sealed it, but again, winning out would give them a survivor's chance. But Illinois, they have a chance coming up this week to prove their legitimacy. They go on the road to number 1, the recently anointed Oregon Ducks in Eugene. That's going to be a really tough test. They've already shown struggles against the best of the best this season, but it's a valuable win for the Fighting Illini, and more about them in a minute. But now moving into week 9, going over one game that did already happen. Shout out the Kennesaw State Owls. Kennesaw State won their first game at the FBS level over previously undefeated Liberty on Wednesday night. An incredible win for the Owls. Shout out everybody's favorite team to start a rebuild with on College Football 25. And just for this team, in reality, it's a great way to get that first win and a great way to start building up that confidence, because that's what they're going to need as they adjust to a new level of college football. Getting a win like this shows that they can compete with the best, especially in their conference at this level. So a big win for the Owls. Now moving into week 9, couple of games during the week. You've got Syracuse, who's 5-1, 2-1 in the ACC, at number 19 Pitt, who's 6-0 and 2-0 in the conference. Pat Narduzzi has the Panthers going in the right direction this year. It seems like it's either an ACC Coastal Division championship or 3 or 4 wins. There's not much in between for Pittsburgh under Pat Narduzzi, but he has the Panthers playing well. However, I'm going to go with the road upset here for the Orange. I think Kyle McCord knows how to play in tough road environments like he did at Notre Dame for Ohio State. He did struggle against Michigan, but I think Heinz Field, for at least for the Panthers, is much more comparable to Notre Dame Stadium than it is to the Big House. So I think he gets a road win here. Then an exciting game on Friday night, big one in the Mountain West. You've got Boise State, who I think is 5-1, against UNLV, who's 5 or 6-1. At UNLV, they've obviously had the situation with their quarterback and a couple other players opting out, sitting out the rest of the year and transferring. And then on the flip side, you've got Boise State and their running back supreme of Ashton Jeanty. The Boise State running back has rushed for 1,200 yards this season, and I saw this graphic on Instagram. I think it was CBS Sports posted it. Reggie Bush and Mark Ingram, 2 of the last 3 Heisman Trophy winning running backs, had something like 600 to 700 rushing yards with a comparable number of carries. Jeanty is right around, I think, 126 carries. So the efficiency and the caliber with which Ashton Jeanty is playing this year is really unmatched, and he is undisputed the best running back in college football this year, and he's getting into the debate. Still has a ways to go, but he's getting into the debate for best running back of all time, at least for a single season. He is seriously in that discussion. So awesome things out there in the Mountain West for Boise State and for their Bronco running back. Now moving into the traditional Saturday action, Nebraska, who's reeling from that loss to Indiana, they're 5-2, 2-2, going in to the shoe. Number 4 Ohio State, who's 5-1, 2-1, fresh off a bye, probably going to be playing a little bit angry after that loss to Oregon a couple weeks ago. However, the Buckeyes are going to have to limit the big plays. They've given up a lot this season, especially in the loss to Oregon. It's something that's been an issue for the Buckeyes for the better part of the last decade. I would say 2016 was probably the last year that this defense really played consistently like the Silver Bullets, outside of that loss to Clemson in the playoff that year, of course. But I don't think there's too much to be worried about. Nebraska does have the potential for the big play with Raiola at quarterback. I got a speedster receiver like Jalen Lloyd, but their offense was almost non-existent against Indiana, and I think they're more likely to be like that again this week. I'm going to go with Ohio State 37, Nebraska 17. I think it's kind of just a safe pick because it's such a big spread. I could see Nebraska coming out playing a little bit better this week, but overall, I think Ohio State probably wins this one fairly comfortably. I'm just not quite giving them the points here. Another kind of interesting matchup here, I believe also in the noon window, is number 12 Notre Dame, who's 6-1, at number 24 Navy, 6-0, 4-0 in the American Conference. The question is here, can the midshipmen continue their magical season? First time here taking a deeper look at Navy. This is their first really big game, first ranked opponent. Their quarterback, Blake Horvath, has thrown for 888 passing yards, 888. Put that one in the slot machine. I don't advise that. 10 touchdowns, just 1 interception, and he's also ran, as you'd expect from a Navy quarterback, for 621 rush yards and 10 touchdowns. But again, the big stat here is those passing yards, because Navy traditionally has been obviously more of that kind of option, especially triple option team. Maybe not quite as much run heavy as Army, but they've certainly done that in the past, so they show they're more multifaceted this year. His favorite receiver is Eli Heidenreich, who has thrown for 485 or who has received 485 of those passing yards and 5 touchdowns. And then running back Alex Texa, hope I'm saying that right, 306 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns. On the opposite side, Riley Leonard kind of had those early season struggles again last week against Georgia Tech. He threw for just over 200 yards and had an interception. The previous 3 games, which the caliber of opponents weren't as high, he was a lot more efficient. Completed 70% of his passes for 546 yards, 6 touchdowns, and no interceptions. I think this one's going to be a little bit closer to that Georgia Tech level in terms of the opponent that they're playing, but I think Notre Dame has enough pieces to get the job done. If this one was in Annapolis, I would consider seriously a Navy upset, but I think Notre Dame is able to get the job done here. I think they might have a pretty pro Fighting Irish crowd there in a little bit more of a neutral site venue, and I think that will help. I think it does play a factor. So Notre Dame 27, Navy 23. Then, looking at Illinois, talked about them already. They're number 20, 6-1, 3-1 in the conference, and they're going on the road to number 1 Oregon, who's 7-0, 4-0 in conference. The Ducks are number 1 for the first time since 2012. But when Dan Lanning this week was asked about that, he literally said, "Who cares?" I think that just exemplifies his personality as a coach. He's going to have this Oregon team ready to guard against complacency. So I think Oregon is really not going to have too many issues. Illinois has a decent defense, but I don't think they're going to be able to keep up with the weapons that Oregon has. I'm going to go with Oregon 37, Illinois 20 here, which I think would be the Ducks covering the spread, but I think it's a bigger spread than that. Then, moving into an important SEC matchup between a couple of teams that haven't looked great this year. Number 21, Missouri, 6-1, 2-1 in conference, and number 15, Alabama, 5-2, 2-2 in conference. The Tide have been slipping recently, and the Tigers have not exactly been overly impressive, but they are winning mostly. They do have 1 loss. Again here, Jalen Milroe, like I talked about with their loss to Tennessee, turnovers have been his issue all year. 6 interceptions and a couple of fumbles, I think. I know he had the one in the red zone against South Florida. Mizzou isn't great at getting takeaways. In fact, they rank near the bottom of the SEC with just 5 interceptions and 3 forced fumbles. I think Alabama is, while their culture and the future is a bit more up in the air, I might talk about that more in another video or after this season. AJ McCarron talked about the culture and how it's failing right now at Alabama, so might dive into that a little bit more, again, if I have time during the season or certainly after. But I think when you look at this week, Alabama gets the job done, returning to Tuscaloosa, 31, Missouri, 17. Then looking at a game that I think most would have easily just gone right over earlier in this year. Number 5, Texas, 6-1, 2-1 in conference, and number 25, Vanderbilt, who's 5-2, 2-1 in conference. They have been the Commodores of Chaos already against that Crimson Tide team. Can they do it again against the Longhorns? Longhorns have been slipping, or at least the last week they did. Overall, they looked good before that. Vanderbilt is rising. UT is favored by 18.5. I think the big matchup to watch here, though, is going to be Diego Pavia, the Commodores quarterback, against the Texas secondary. Pavia has just one interception, I think, to 10 or 11 passing touchdowns, while the Texas secondary has 10 interceptions, which ranks, I think, best or second best in the SEC and among the best nationally. I think that's going to be a huge thing to watch. I think what will be a key factor in that, though, is Pavia playing in his home stadium. And I think also Vanderbilt is less likely to be overtaken by road crowds now. I think there will certainly be a pretty strong Texas contingent there, but I do think they have a little bit more home field advantage than they have in previous years. I think that plays to their advantage, and I think in spite of being big home dogs, Vanderbilt gets the win. It seems like what they're best suited as under Clark Lee, being underrated and being the underdogs. I'm going to go Vanderbilt 34, Texas 30. Then, quickly, one more game before the game of the week. The reason I've got Kyle Field behind me here. Number 3, Penn State, who's 6-1 in conference, 6-0 overall, 3-0 in conference, at Wisconsin, who's 5-2, 2-1. This is a true trap game for the Nittany Lions. Kind of 3 different factors here. It's a tough road environment. Camp Randall's always a tough place to play. They've got a big game coming up next week against Ohio State, and Wisconsin is on a 3-game winning streak. In those last 3 games, Wisconsin's defense has been really good. Their opponents, I would say, haven't quite been up to snuff, but they've only allowed 16 points in the last 3 games, 16 points total. However, another important factor here is the Badgers have struggled against good offenses. They lost to Alabama, and then in the second half to USC. But the point there is, in the last 4 games, Wisconsin has put together 7 really solid halves of football. I would argue really good halves of football. They went up 21-10 on the Trojans, fell apart in the second half, but outside of that second half, they've played really well the last 4 weeks. However, I think Penn State is able to get focused in spite of some controversy over the way James Franklin has handled some questions about cases involving his players of allegations. Not a good look there at Penn State, but I do think they're able to get the win here. Penn State 23, Wisconsin 16. Now finally, moving into the game of the week here on College Football Talk, number 8 LSU 6-1, 3-0 in the SEC, at number 14 Texas A&M 6-1, 4-0 in conference. This is a battle for first in the Southeastern Conference, believe it or not. Both of these teams are 2 of the only 3 undefeated teams in conference play remaining. LSU quarterback Garrett Nussmeier ranks 6th nationally in the FBS in passing yards, 2nd in the SEC behind Jackson Dart with 2,222. Make-A-Wish. And LSU's averaging 34.1 points per game. Most of Nussmeier's throws, or at least a good chunk of them, his dependable receiver has been Kyron Lacey, who has 512 yards and 6 touchdowns. But it's been a pretty even split. I mean, Lacey, that's only a quarter of, actually a little bit less than a quarter of Nussmeier's passing yards. A lot of times you see a bigger percentage for a leading receiver, kind of like Navy's quarterback receiver connection even. But Lacey has been one of the best receivers. Aaron Anderson, their tight end, has also been really good. Both teams have won 6 in a row. Something else to watch here, I think Connor Wigman will be able to settle in, both playing in front of the home crowd and the fact that LSU is tied in the SEC for the fewest interceptions with just 4 this season. I think A&M kind of relies on their ground game a little bit more anyways. Le'Veon Moss has 674 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns, so it's kind of strength of LSU's passing offense against the strength of Texas A&M's ground game. I think LSU is able to get a few more points. They've already gotten a good win in conference play over Ole Miss. The common opponent here is Arkansas. I think Texas A&M won by only 4 points or at least less than a touchdown as a one-score game, and then LSU won, I think, 34-10. So that's kind of another important point here. One final one, both the common opponent, the only one that they've both faced this season, and the fact that A&M has been hot and cold. It's kind of been a question of which A&M team are we going to get. They haven't been overly impressive really in any game this season. They struggled. They only won 26-20 against Bowling Green. Similarly, they struggled in the game against Arkansas. And then obviously the home loss to Notre Dame, who Notre Dame is a good team, but nonetheless it is still a home loss. I think they get another one here. LSU 28, Texas A&M 24. After this, I think LSU is in prime position to finish atop the SEC conference at the end of the regular season. They have home games against Alabama, Vanderbilt, and Oklahoma, and their only road game is at Florida. I think the Gators have looked better, but I'm willing to say right now, I would predict if they win this game, I think the Tigers go 4-0 the rest of the way, and I think that sets them up for a meeting with the Georgia Bulldogs for the SEC championship game. So, this is a big win. It would be a big win for either one of these teams. And if LSU gets the win, I think they're well positioned. Alabama will still be tough, but they'll have, I think, a pretty clear path. Vanderbilt will be tough too, but maybe not as much on the road. They'll have pretty much a clear path. LSU will after this if they're able to get the win. But let me know your thoughts, your predictions for this upcoming week in the comments below. But thank you so much for taking the time to watch College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.